Hello and welcome back to the Dugout All 12 teams as we preview every Scottish Premiership club's 2025-26 season. I'm pleased to be joined by Quinny, obviously from the Celts Are Here. And if you haven't heard of him, then go and check him out on X and his YouTube videos on the Celts Are Here. Quinny, how are you?
I'm very good, Ethan. Thanks a lot for inviting us on. Been looking forward to doing this one. And yeah, the season is right around the corner, so it's battle stations time, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, the big talking point around Celtic at the moment is the signings, or some fans would complain the lack of. I think one of the main signings that's really come in is obviously Benjamin Nygren, who seems to have nailed down a starting place in that midfield. And you, I think, identified him before really anyone and picked him out as a player Celtic could sign.
Yeah, so I think all that kind of came around when we were linked to Kavitz Gardens for maybe the second or third straight window or whatever. So I just kind of put on the scouting cap and had a wee look around the Danish Super League. And when you looked at that league last year, like Negren really jumps to top of the page, top of the list on so many different metrics, goals, assists, chance creation, whatever. I kind of wrote him off a little bit, but because I thought he would be out of our price, our kind of price point. He had links in January to Brentford and Brighton for like 10 million euros or whatever. And normally when you see that, it's kind of linked to a player, you're like, okay, well, we won't be after him. We won't be going for it. But it's not really the way it panned out, thankfully. And it's one of these ones where I think we've managed to get like a top of the food chain level target out of a league and really bring him in. And I think that's like an important distinction for Celtic. We've had some other players I'm sure we'll talk about as the show goes on that we've brought in and we might look to bring in. But it's one of the more understated elements, I would say, of like the Kyogo signing and the Daisen Maeda signing, is they were the best striker in Japan. Like, no two ways about it. They were top goal scorer, they were league winners, that kind of thing. And even the Balakwisha kind of thing. Like, again, Balakwisha is a league winner, played in Champions League, he's a top of the food chain striker in the Belgian league. And when you looked at the Danish league, Negren was the guy that is in that category. So really pleased that, yeah, we actually found him at a price that Celtic could afford, under 2 million. Could Celtic have dreamed of anything better? Probably not. But yeah, a guy that profiles really well as a forward. But I think if you put the eye test on him, he's a guy that you can see like it's probably better with a front three in front of him. But yeah, it did give us that early sense of maybe he's the Kuhn replacement, but then he wasn't, and let's see how it kind of shakes out from there. But yeah, we've did quite well on the Celts Are Here channel with the transfer previews. We've did like 20 episodes of it now, since the end of last or towards the end of last season, certainly. And a few of the players that we've profiled have came, to actually be linked to Celtic and maybe one or two other teams in the league as well. Oliver Antman is a player I was really excited for us to maybe try and get, but he might be on his way to Rangers, as it were. So yeah, really happy with Negren. A wee bit despondent with the lack of business thereafter, but but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with Negren, I think.
Yeah, and the other sort of signings that you look at as ones that are really going to compete for those first starting 11, Kieran Tierney obviously slots in there with no other natural left back, although Hayato Inamura's played there. And then the signing that hasn't been announced yet, but looks like a done deal, the loan, Simpson Pusey. Do you think he'll start regardless of the fact that he's a right footer? And we've seen Brendan Rodgers like to have a left and right footer in that back too.
So I'm really in two minds with this one, right? I am of the opinion right now that I think what you've just mentioned there or you've just mentioned Tierney. Kieran Tierney, like I've watched a lot of since he's left Celtic. Like I watch a lot of Spanish football, so I've seen like every minute he played for Sociedad, catch a fair amount of Arsenal over the last couple of years. Tierney's not playing 6 games a month. He's not going to play 7 games a month. Maybe he plays five. He'll probably play four quite often. And I think Carter Vickers might be in set up for the same treatment this year because Carter Vickers, season on season, has missed important games in the earlier stages of the year. So I'm kind of the mind that JSP or Simpson Pussy or whatever we're going to call him is maybe an insurance policy on Dane Murray. So there's a lot of things that gets put into football nowadays for like the veterans, like taking people under their wing, and we maybe see that at Celtic at the moment with the goalkeepers like Schmeichel and Sinisalo. You see it in clubs all around the world. It's not a new idea or anything. But what I think this Simpson Pussy thing does for Murray is it gives him like a colleague. It gives him someone that's kind of like in his same space, but he's came from that elite environment of Man City, Premier League or whatever. And that could be a really good like yardstick for him to really measure like where his gaps are or where the bridge he needs to, the gap he needs to bridge kind of thing. So I think it's number one going to be that we manage Vickers a lot better, and then it's an insurance policy on can Murray actually make the step up. If he can't, then this guy probably can, and if that guy doesn't, it's probably because he pushes Murray on a bit and Murray
Yeah,
gets an extra yard out of his game or gets a bit stronger and he kind of knows, well, if I wanted to be at that Premier League level, this is the sort of guy that, they've got in their academy and they've put in the first team. So can I jump as high as him? Am I as quicker? Do I read danger as fast? And that sort of thing. The other side of it is, does he come into partner Carter Vickers? Because the defence is very one-dimensional. Vickers, Trusty, Scales. Scales is the least culpable of the three, but not that that really changes his situation too much. But they really struggle to play out. They really struggle to carry the ball, and it's a very understated attribute for a defender because it sounds really easy. When you see some of them do it, it looks really easy. Like just to even stride 10 yards up the park takes a lot of bravery, composure, and you kind of need to be in that kind of chess mode of three moves ahead. I'm going to move up here. This guy will close me down. Where are my options or whatever? So could he be the guy that is the ball player? Could he play with Vickers more often than not and be that guy that came from the elite background and gives us that other dimension into defence? So I think they're the two kind of forks in the road for this JSP guy. I'm more of the opinion it's the Murray. Whenever I'm talking about the situation, the image in my head is like greyhounds chasing a hare, if that makes sense. Like JSP is like the hare and Dane Murray's like the greyhound. Like that's how fast you need to be, that's how quick you need to be around the corners, kind of thing. So I'm more inclined to think it's that kind of move.
that's a really interesting point, and I never really thought about it that way. But now that you've explained it to me, it does make a lot of sense. And the other signings, I think, that have not convinced the Celtic fans that the two striker appointments, Callum Osmond and Shin Yamada, I think a lot of Celtic fans, on top of they two and Johnny Kenny and Adam Mead, I think that there's still space for um, another signing up top. I think Celtic definitely need a few attackers. Where do you think the squad needs players, especially at the moment?
Well, I think the number one area is the front line. Rogers has quoted that himself, but I do think it's going to be very unlikely we get another centre forward. Rogers is kind of on the record already that he wants a one and two, with number three being a youth player, and that was back in the era when we still had Rocco Vata in the club, and that was the kind of chat around then. So I kind of viewed Shin Yamada on arrival as like an O replacement, but maybe Ida is the O replacement and Yamada's the Kyogo replacement. But I think that is going to be the A and the B of the forward row this season as it stands right now. Negren could maybe play through the middle. The people in Denmark said he was pretty rubbish at it. Jacob Bream, who we've been linked to, can also play through the middle, but he's maybe more of a 10 than a forward. But maybe there's a whole false nine thing you could try. So between that kind of dynamic, the way it sits, Kenny or Osmond is going to be striker free. I think it'll just be a matter of contractual situations and who you can loan out. I don't really see us getting another striker in, an actual centre forward. I think it will be wide players. It'll be versatile wide players like Jacob Bream, Balikwisha, guys that can play both sides. They can maybe play central, and it gives Rodgers some variety in the squad. Makes him a wee bit harder to scout maybe in some of those bigger matches. Like, does Maeda play through the middle, or do you get enough wingers? Do you get enough wingers where you could play Maeda through the middle? Do you play him left? Do you play this guy right? So I think, Rodgers again's on the record that we need more goals into the front line. Kuhn had massive goal contributions last year. Kyogo did okay. Not as good, not his best season by his own standards, but still a lot of goals out the team. And I think the only way we're going to get them back in is the wide areas, the wings, because as we sit and talk today, the four wingers on the books are Tilio, Yang, Forrest, and Maeda. So there's a real lack of goals in there. So I think that's the number one area. I'm quite interested by the Bajcetic, Bajcetic loan move from Liverpool. I think that could be a really transformative one for like the squad management throughout the year. Probably doesn't really move us on too much, but I think the main business has to be the forward line, particularly in the wide areas.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And moving on, obviously the real concern with it, the lack of depth in the wing areas, is that Champions League qualifier coming up. And last night, after the second round, a lot of all the second round qualifiers were done, we kind of found out who Celtic could play against. I've got them here, so I'll just read them out. Slovan Bratislava, obviously, we played them last year, of Slovakia. Kairat Almaty of Kazakhstan, FC Basel of Switzerland, Karabag of Azerbaijan, Shkendija of North Macedonia, Dynamo Kiev of Ukraine, Paphos of Cyprus, and Sturm Graz of Austria. So you look on the face of it, Celtic will be heavy favourites going into all of those ties, but that's not to say that Celtic can't do the unthinkable and lose across two legs, is it?
No, it's well, I've been there so many times myself before over the years with Molders and Malmos and you name it. We've had the banana skin from them all. So I think that's the most frustrating part about the business when you get those green shoots of progress with maybe the Negren move and one or two other things we spoke about already. That you would think, I've been very hopeful that the board's greed would work in our favour this summer because of all the money they made last year from the Champions League. Like, surely they would just get bitten by the bug and go, we need more of that money this season, next season, and the season after that, and push the envelope, make sure we get that, don't take any risks with it. But they are kind of toying with fate right now. I think we are quite sensitive to the draw. Like, if we get Basel will be a really tough game, A lot of people are pointing out Shaqiri, of course. Shaqiri's like obviously the talisman in the team, a real player with X factor, who played really well against us for Inter Milan in the UEFA or Europa League knockout round in January. It was one of the knockout ties. John Guidetti scored in it. A lot of people might remember it. Shaqiri was up front in that game. But they do also have guys like Marvin Hitz in goals, who's a very well decorated, was a Switzerland international, played for Borussia Dortmund, played in the Bundesliga for a long time. And if you look at their whole squad, it's littered with guys like that are actually really good, but maybe they're past it, or maybe they weren't quite good enough for Germany and England. So Basel are a real banana skin. I don't think Sturm Graz are too far removed from that, but they're on a kind of lower kind of pay grade. Dynamo Kiev are a wee bit of an unknown, but everyone else, like, probably we should be okay. But again, Celtic write these teams off at their peril, don't they?
Yeah, and that's the point you made about you thought that maybe Celtic would go and splash a bit of that cash this summer, but I don't know if you've heard about the prospect of Champions League down the line being a lot less realistic, and I think it's not next year, but the season after. It looks like unless Scotland does really well this year, sorry, across the board in European competitions, then the champions of Scotland will have to play 3 rounds of qualifiers. So you wonder whether Celtic are trying to kind of save that money and stretch out a bit longer. But then again, surely you would want to take the risk now to get in while you can and make sure there isn't any chance that, obviously, there's always going to be a chance, but give yourself the highest chance to win this playoff match and then get the £40 million or whatever it is again on top of the last few seasons.
Totally. The three qualifier thing doesn't scare me too much. I know I made a funny face there, but when you play the first qualifier, it's normally like Lincoln Red Imps and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like the first qualifier, maybe two, because again, you're in the champions pot in this kind of situation. You'd imagine this. I think in this scenario, the second team probably goes Europa League. They probably don't get Champions League qualifying, so you're in that champions pot against the champion of Gibraltar, the champion of Latvia and Lithuania and whatever in those earlier rounds. But it's the fact that those summers, we know how they go. It's the exact same as this one. They won't do anything until progress is assured. It then derails pre-season kind of the way we've liked to do it over the last couple of years or whatever. So yeah, I'm with you. Like, I would really like to hope and imagine that the board, yeah, like, don't play with fire too much and they really do push the boat out to make these signings come over the line, because Champions League is like the headline kind of thing right now. But like, for the purposes of the show and for all Scottish football fans, that the meat and potatoes, the bread and butter, whatever you want to call it, is the domestic stuff, and I've been on record on my channel and on a few other Celtic ones. I fancy Hearts to get second this year. Like, I've just got a wee funny feeling they don't play any midweeks this year. They're not in Europe at all, and we can talk about that, whatever. But um, like the league, like, you just need to blink sometimes and it can slip between your fingers, and if there is more places, I would even put Hearts in the category to like take your spot necessarily, but if there's more teams that can take points off you now, which I think you look at Hearts, Aberdeen, Hibs, again, teams we dropped points to anyway last year, they're just going to get a lot more points across the year, be a bit more dangerous as an opponent. And the front line we currently have, I think Shin will do quite well, by the way. He seems to have impressed quite early on. But if it's Shin and Ida is the A and the B of the forward, Dyson needs to play every minute of every game at left wing, and then you're splitting 90 minutes on Yang and Forrest. Like that is going to get old really quick. That is going to tire really quick. So yeah, don't write anything off as it stands at the moment, Champions League or domestically.
Yeah, and just to touch on the winger that's obviously been linked with Celtic a lot over the last week, or maybe even longer than that, Jakob Broom, as you mentioned. Do you think Celtic really want him, and do you think Celtic are really going to pay the fee that Go Ahead Eagles are looking for their player?
Well, again, I was in the same situation with Briam when I previewed the Eredivisie that I was with Negren, where he was so clearly like top of the food chain, stats through the roof, great season, 21. Go Ahead Eagles as well won the cup last year, which is maybe a bit understated in all this. So they had quite a season there in Europe this year, very
Yeah,
small team. They've sold, there was three players in that team I would have liked us to sign. One's already went to Anderlecht. We've already mentioned the one that may go to Rangers. But again, I kind of wrote us off for this thinking his transfer value would have been Engels level. We probably wouldn't pay that from a guy from the Dutch league, but it is actually very much within our grasp. 6 million euros, 5 million, whatever it is. I think it's his versatility that the club is really attracted to because he's not really a wingery winger. Same as Negren. Like, they're very similar in that kind of way. They're not, I don't want to say they're similar players, whatever, but I mean in terms of, how comfortable they are wide or through the middle, that kind of thing. So I think it's certainly a player we want because I think the versatility to be able to play, right across the front positions I think it's a very important Celtic transfer targets at the moment is that they can play more than one position because we do have Jota that will come back into the fold. And I think all Celtic fans are just writing him off until January. He's been kind of seen in and around the building, so it might be not as bad as that. But again, Jota can play left or right. Jota, the first time, played left and we played Dyson on the right because Jota was so good on the left and Dyson was not really flavour of the month back then, as a lot of people will remember. But now it's kind of went the other way around where Dyson has to play on the left because that's the best place for him out wide. And Jota's getting better he was getting better on the right hand side for us before he got injured. So I think it's the versatility of Briam that really jumps to them. His age is great as well, being 21, because if he plays for us for 2 or 3 years, some Champions League credentials, put some medals around his neck. That's 6 million quid. That's a guy that easily could be 3 times the price with the right development and success. So I certainly think it is a player that we're after, but the low ball offers really scratch your head. Like why? Like I get the whole like putting your first bid in to kind of set the tempo on expectation. Like I get that, but like there comes a point where there's you're not connected to reality. One of the things I found really frustrating this summer, and it'd be interesting to hear your opinion on this as well, is the amount of money that's getting spent between other clubs of our standing. It's not just like, Benfica are selling players to Chelsea for mad money or whatever, but like Copenhagen are selling players for 20 million to Benfica. Bruges are buying players from PSV for 15 and 20 million, It's all sorts of business like that going around, and we're phoning up Going Ahead Eagles and going, all right, how's 1 million sound? Like it's crazy. We're in a time capsule.
yeah, that is really strange. As I think someone I seen this morning, I think it was actually on X or Twitter, someone was saying that apparently Broom has a release clause on his contract that starts next summer. That's €2 million or something. Maybe why Celtic were lowballing so much, but I don't know if that's a lot of nonsense that somebody's just made up to excuse the embarrassment of how Celtic have tried to negotiate the situation.
Yeah, maybe that explains it for sure. Yeah, but I mean, waiting a year for a guy like that, it's just not going to be economic, isn't it? To save the 4 million, because otherwise it could get you into the Champions League and do all that kind of stuff. Even winning a match in the Champions League probably pays for a nice chunk of that transfer fee if he was to be a match winner on a day or anything like that. So I like Briam a lot. I think he'll fit the team really well. He's a good he's a Celtic style kind of player. The only reservation I've had over the Go Ahead Eagle players or even any of the majority of players I've scouted for the channel over the last like 6 months, 4 months or whatever, it's just the Champions League bridge. Like some of them don't really have that much experience beyond what leagues they've played in. And coming into Scotland, you normally expect that to translate well enough. And if it is Holland, like, if you're playing for Go Ahead Eagles, you're playing Feyenoord home and away, Ajax home and away, PSV, AZ, Twente. There's like some good clubs in Holland. So it's not too big of a stretch to imagine. Like, yeah, playing Sporting Lisbon away might not be a big hassle for him, Anderlecht at home or whatever. But it's those bigger matches, Chelsea, City, Bayern, Real. That's the kind of unknown element of it all. And maybe that's part of the reason. He did get a bad injury last year. He did recover from it, got back into the team before the season closed out. But it's maybe that element as well where Celtic don't want to overcommit. Because Arnie Engels was kind of in that band as well of good league experience, but didn't really have that, upper end. He only got into the national team after signing for us, so that was new to him at that point as well. So yeah, maybe that plays a bit of a factor in the pricing for it.
Yeah, I think that was that similar story with. I know the Balikwisha rumours have kind of dried up a little bit, but I think a lot of the kind of reports were that Celtic were sceptical over his injury record and that kind of Antwerp were trying to let go of him, trying to move him on, which sometimes isn't a very good sign as to that Celtic are getting a good deal.
Yeah. Kind of like us with Kyogo and his dodgy shoulder a bit, isn't it? Like if we're all right for him to leave it, whatever price we got for him, it's one of those ones. So yeah, no, there's definitely no smoke without fire sometimes with these ones, and the board are wise to do their best to not be burned, but it does get to the point where it becomes counterproductive a bit, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. And just getting on to previewing, well, obviously we previewed the squad and the season, but how do you think this season, before I get your predictions, what would be your expectations from the Celtic squad this season under Brendan Rodgers? And a question I haven't asked you that I should probably ask you is, do you think this will be Brendan Rodgers' last season at Celtic?
So that's a great question. I'll answer that first because it kind of goes into what I think about the year ahead. I don't think this will be Brendan's last season for the main reason that why come back to just play these 3 years the way that they'll pan out, two doubles and whatever happens this year. Um, so I don't see why he would do that. Like, because by all accounts he was just released from Leicester on a gardening leave, and we like dragged him in, went to his house in Mallorca and gave him a pitch and all that and brought him over. So why would they? Why would they take the initiative to do that if it was just going to be for the 3 years? I do think there's a wee bit of politics going on behind the scenes around it, so I don't think it's as quite as clear and cut as it's in his hands entirely. But I think from Rodgers' POV, I don't. He will not get better job security at any other club in the world. He will not have as much control over operations at any other club in the world. He will not be as easily accessible to the Champions League at any other club he's likely to get a job at. I don't see any reason for him to leave, really. Because again, when you think about the job security angle of it, it's quite an understated element of football nowadays. But if you're a football manager, like, you could be sacked at any minute. And Brendan Rodgers has played that game enough times now in his career where, we've seen it with a few guys over the years. An example is escaping me right now, but the job security element of it is massive, and yeah, Brendan's rich enough; he doesn't need to work, but does he want to leave Celtic to go to another club where in 6 months he could be canned or all that grief again? I don't think so. I think he's here to legacy build. I think that really is the stone that's unturned for him. So, with that being said, I think this year it's hard to imagine we score more goals than last year because of where we're at right now. We broke a record last year. Last year, Rodgers stated in press conferences, "I want to win the treble. That is our goal this year." So I would expect that to be a kind of bee in his bonnet from last year. And the Champions League thing is it's kind of the main headline of the season. It's really hard to talk on that until we see qualifying and draws and all that kind of stuff. But I think we're going to see the best version of Hatate. I think we're going to see the best version of Maeda this year. And I think domestically, like the one thing with Hatate is he has divided the fans, but that's lessened as every year has went on. And I think this year is going to be one of those years where everyone is quite in unison. And Hatate he played every game last year except for those last two where the Aberdeen player kicked him into next Sunday, and injured him for that. But Hatate, if you remember when he first started, didn't play every week. And if he did start every week, he was getting dragged off at 60, 65 every time. He now plays 90 minutes regularly. He'd now basically played every game last season. And with someone like Negren to really help like carry that burden of creating from central, creating from deep even as well, I think he's going to hit some mad heights. I think Maeda won't be too far behind as well because I think he's coming into the peak of his powers. So I can imagine our play is a lot better than last year. I find it hard to imagine where we're at right now because, if you watch Celtic last year, how many games were so frustrating? against 11 men behind the ball and we were passing between Vickers and McGregor for half an hour before someone would take a shot, you know. I don't think that will be quite as frustrating this year as it was last. But like I say, at this point in time, it's hard to imagine we score more goals. I do think the league is a lot more competitive. So the points tally, I don't know if I find it hard to imagine we get more, but I just think the domestic stuff is going to be so much tougher this year. Probably the toughest year in recent memory, I think.
Yeah.
You know, like let's see how it goes, you know, but that's my kind of feeling now. I still expect us to win the leagues. I just think we're good enough and we should run the course. But when it comes to trebles and stuff like that, like I'm not too sure. It'll be one of those glamour years where it's all conquering, all raining, all competitions, week in, week out, 5-0s and 4-0s and whatever. I think it might be a bit more of that kind of quiet 2-0, 1-0, maybe drop a draw away. You need a replay, extra time for some of these cup games or whatever at the wrong time. Then December, then after a Champions League game. So I could maybe see a wee bit of that getting on top of us, but I think it'll be a good year. I think actually on the pitch it will look a lot better than last year, although the results and the statistics might not be as impressive as last year. Is probably the best way to sum it up.
Yeah, that's a good way to sum it up. And just to, I've kind of thought of this question after I'd asked you about Brendan Rodgers. Do you think it's a good thing that Celtic this season, it's quite clear that not all the signings are, well, in quotes, Brendan Rodgers signings? Do you think that's a good thing that the club aren't, or the owners aren't letting him get all the power to make all the signings? And because I don't think at a football club that's how it should be. But obviously, Brendan Rodgers likes to have all the power when it comes to incomings and whatever, and he has done. But do you think that's a good thing that the board are kind of saying, right, we need to look after ourselves as well, in a sense?
Well, it's funny, Ethan, because like I'm not too sure where this narrative comes from on like Rodgers needs to control everything. 'Cause I'm not too sure he controlled that much at Leicester, and we know he didn't really do it at Liverpool. Celts Are Here. We were invited to the press conference when Rodgers got when he returned, and the question I asked him, I'm paraphrasing, right? But I was quite strong with this. You can find the press conference, you'll hear the question. It's not too far off. But I said something to him along the lines of, you were very frustrated last time you left Celtic, and you were talking about players you couldn't get, and all that other kind of stuff. And you know, it must have been one hell of a presentation they gave you to get you to convince you that things will be different this time. And I said to him, what will be different this time? What's your expectations on recruitment? And his answer to me was, bearing in mind we just had Ange and Japanese imports and whatever, but his answer to me was, oh, well, the club has got this fantastic network now where we're looking at untapped markets and da da da. So he told me straight in the first press conference, the club is scouting. The club is IDing players, and I'll maybe greenlight them or I'll maybe weigh up the list, pros and cons. I'll maybe order the list top to bottom. But he was quite clear that the club is like doing the legwork at the very least, if not the whole thing. But what's kind of flown in the face of that is that the club signings in his first window, of course, have pretty much all left now. And we can clearly see that he's dipping into the contacts book for Casper Schmeichels and Jeffrey Schlups and, whatever else, Ben Davies and, these types of guys. So I think he's content with the recruitment process. I've been kind of floating this, don't know what I say it's a conspiracy theory, but I think Brendan Rodgers has got, let's see this Jacob Braham thing we're talking about. I'm convinced somewhat that Brendan Rodgers has been told any player under 5 million quid, you don't need to phone up for authorization. We're just going to go and sign them. So if you want a guy, he's 1 million, knock your socks off, 2 million, 4 million, whatever, go for it. If it comes over 5 million, me, you, the director, Tisdale, we need to sit down, evaluate it, pros and cons. And on the side of that, if it's not quite as that, I think he's been given a soft budget of 10 million pre-qualifier, and it'll be like, get through the qualifier, we'll give you 30. Don't get through the qualifier, we'll give you 20. Something like that. I think there's a split in the budget this year in some way, whether it's, and he's just thinking to save all the meetings, I'll just try for all the guys I can that are 3 million, see what ones I can get or whatever, and then we'll do the heavy lifting once the stuff on the pitch is taken care of. So he's also got to be super focused on the team and tactics and training and whatever. So I think it's one of those two things that's going on. I don't think that's a real problem for him because it seems to be kind of what he expected coming into it. But whatever one of those two conspiracies is reality, it's definitely got teething problems and still needs to be ironed out a little bit because you can clearly see the team is under strength. You can clearly see through his words in the media, he is frustrated now, so I don't think it really is a deal breaker for him or a real change of situation. But yeah, there's like teething problems there, I think, isn't there? However it's structured.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's all I've got for you, Quinny. So thanks very much for coming on. And if the viewers haven't happened to see Quinny and they've happened to stumble across this podcast, and go and check him out on X, go and check out the Celts Are Here, or the Here Celts on X. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.